there is a lot of value in seeking to understand and asking questions. And you may still be right. You may be right at the end of the day, right? But just getting people there to be with you at the same time. I always got feedback that you're already on step 12 and people are only on step 1.5, right? They cannot go that fast. And so you need to bring them along for the ride. So that was my first kind of inflection point of how do I do that? And this is where I always talk about, like when I was hiring a lot at like a growth stage startup and I was interviewing a million people. I didn't care if you were the smartest person on the planet, but if you could not communicate and align, I was like, communication and alignment were the most important things to me because that's what my superpowers were. And I don't care like what skills you bring to the table, how technical you are in product. If you can't do that, you're done. You're dead in the water. Right. But I think I learned that from like a lot of experiences along the way. And I think the second point was, when you're a functional leader, and I think this topic came up a lot in the event we were at, it's no longer about your craft, right? And you have to start thinking about the business.
Welcome to the She's So Sweet podcast, where we interview accomplished women who have worked their way to the C-suite. I'm your host, Christy Falteruso, Chief Customer Officer and award-winning customer success executive. I am so excited to introduce today's guest. We've got with us Tara Goldman, who's the co-founder and executive coach at Goldhue. Hi, Tara. How are you?
I'm great. Hi, Christy. How are you?
I'm great. I'm so excited. I was so thrilled that we had an opportunity to like connect in real life a couple of weeks ago and brought us to this conversation today. So I feel like everything always happens for a reason. And so I'm going to say that was our reason in season.
Yeah, it's funny because I have seen you on LinkedIn and all of your kind of amazing posts. And then you happen to be in the group that I facilitated that day. And I was like, oh, look at this. So serendipitous. And here we are.
I love that. And I'm so grateful for you agreeing to join us today and share your story with our listeners. Like I said, there's so much cool things that you have in your background and things that you've done and you've accomplished. And I just think everyone is going to be really inspired and motivated by your story. So I'm excited to jump right in. That said, let's start with, tell us a little bit about yourself, because obviously you've got your own company now, but this isn't where you started. So give us a little bit of a background and then tell us what you're doing in your current role.
Yeah, so I started my career in the New York advertising agency world before technology really hit New York. And I quickly realized that I wanted to be part of building something versus, catering to clients and kind of handing something off. And so I found myself in the world of product management before it was really a functional title, before it became a thing. I guess right place, right time, but really embraced it. And I ended up working in product leadership roles in nonprofits, at startups, at public companies, in all different industries. So I like to say, I wasn't necessarily somebody who has deep, fintech experience or, was a specialist. I really was a generalist and worked in B2B SaaS as well as B2C. And I love just kind of new challenges. And I was really motivated by working for companies who are on really interesting missions. And more importantly, working with great people. That was always my number one. And so after my last, I would say, stint at a public company in the ed tech space, I realized that I wanted to do something different with the next chapter of my career. We live so long these days. And I think that, the old era of thinking was very much, keep a stable job, be somewhere for a long time. And a lot of my friends and family always looked at me like, wait, you're at another company now? And I'm like, this is how you learn and grow these days. And it wasn't that I was jumping every year. It was just, new opportunities came about, every 3 or 4 years or so. And I think that we're meant to have different chapters, right? So I decided to launch the next chapter of my career. And so I do two things now. I have a co-founder at Goldhue where we do consulting from a fractional product strategy and operations perspective. So we work with founders and product leaders, really helping them hone in on how to get things done and how to build products their way. So a lot of what we talk about is the old era of product was very much about, agile and moving fast and all these talking heads and frameworks and playbooks. And it was overwhelming and we overcomplicated what should not be that complicated. And so we talk about kind of the new era of product, which is all about ROI. It's a lot of the topics we heard in the executive SaaS event that we were at, but it hasn't quite hit product and engineering. And so we really want to bring that lens to product because we're in that new era now. So we love doing that work. And then I was really passionate about really, helping people realize what their potential was, and really stepping into their power. And looking back at the 8 or 9 companies that I had worked at, and the many teams and folks even outside my own teams that I mentored and sponsored, I really wanted to dive deeper into that work. So I became a certified executive coach, and I love working one-on-one with leaders or rising leaders, to help them realize, what's already within them. And that's been super fulfilling as well.
I love that. And I love that you have this duality of the work that you get to do, right? From like the consulting work with the businesses, but then also the leadership coaching. Because while there's probably some overlap in the opportunities that you get to work on, I'm sure just understanding that there's different work that you'll be doing is really inspiring. I love that. I have to ask, in your advertising career, what was it that made you change? And I asked because I did my first stint, my first chapter was in marketing.
Mm-hmm.
And so not that different, and in New York, and mine was digital marketing. So I'm always inspired to hear what drove the change. So what was it that kind of launched you from advertising?
I'll be honest, it was 2 things. One was in advertising, and I don't know if it's changed, but it's probably the same. The path to leadership, like how to grow, was really one dimensional. And it was pitching, going into more sales roles, and kind of going on doing more biz dev. So that was one angle. And I was like, I don't know that that was for me. So when you're good at your job, and I was in more account management, marketing management, like that was really it. Like you get to these partner levels, and then you're accountable for bringing in the business. Number 2 was I was in my mid-20s, and I looked at these women. So I know that's kind of a lot of the mission of your podcast. I looked at these women, I'm gonna be honest with you, and I was like, what are they doing? Like they're never around. They're always traveling. They're not home at all with their kids. And I wasn't married, nothing at that point. But I looked up, and I was like, is that the life I want to lead? And I said,
That's
no.
valid.
Yeah. And that shift, that was like my first career pivot. I made a lateral move into a very different role in house. And at the time I thought, like, am I taking a step back? Is this smart? But I realized, in those agencies, like it just, like, it didn't feel right in my body. And it didn't feel like I should be doing those things, despite what people around me were saying. We're like, what do you mean? You're so good at this. And like, you should
Right.
do more. We want to put you on pitches. I'm like, I literally don't want to. Like, what? And so that's hard too, because you're not confident. I wasn't confident in my 20s, like not quite yet. And so it's hard to hear positive feedback, but then also think, is this what I really want to do?
I love that. And so that's why I always ask, because I always feel like there's driving factors behind why we make these pivots. And I know that we'll get into a lot of that as we go further through the conversation today, but I wanted to call that out because I know we'll spend less time talking about the advertising stuff probably, and more time on the back half. So thank you for sharing that. But now let's pivot for a second here. I want to go way, way back, even before advertising. So when you were little, what did you think you were going to do? Because I have to imagine that this probably wasn't the career that you thought you'd land in, and maybe it was, but what did you think you were going to be when you were little?
Well, let's be honest, like technology wasn't a thing when I was little. So like, I could have never imagined that. Like, I didn't have a computer as a child. And cell phones maybe came out when I was like early college. So yeah, I was very different as a child. And I joke today because I have an 8-year-old daughter, and she is very much me now. And so I wonder how she came out like this, but because I was quiet, I didn't even speak to my kindergarten teacher. I was like, I joke, I'm like, I was like mute, right? I was just so shy. I loved puzzles. I loved reading. And I thought, maybe I'll be a lawyer. Like, I don't know why that came to my mind at the time, because later on, I was like, I want nothing to do with that. Like, that did not interest me. Like the reading, the law school thing, the LSATs, like did not consider it for a minute. But what was interesting was I was on another podcast recently, and that host really kind of drew an interesting comparison. And he's like, that's interesting because you ended up in product. And so a lot of what you have to do in product is translate and compromise and negotiate. And, you have to be at the center of things, but be able to really meet your audience where they are. And it's like, it's not so far away from, like, think about like a lawyer in a courtroom. And I was like, I literally never thought about that correlation. But that is kind of what I thought very, very early on, young. And then I think I was really open. Like, I had friends who were like, I'm going to be a pediatrician, and they went and did that. Or like, I'm going to be a plastic surgeon, and they went and did that. And I think I was always in this squishy phase of, I'm just like going to take interesting classes and explore things. And I thought something was wrong with me because I just didn't have this like really
Yeah.
specific guide or vision for this is what I'm going to go do. And where I went to college was a liberal arts college, but people went into either three areas. They either went into investment banking at the time, medical school, or law school. And I was
Oh,
like,
wow.
cool. I suck because I'm like not in that bucket. And I was the weirdo going into like digital marketing. And everyone's like, what is that at the time? But I think that lent itself well to like navigating a career that isn't necessarily supposed to be a linear path. And I just kind of, it's like a little river and you kind of just flow with it and see where the opportunities are.
Which is so interesting because I feel like you and I, there's very similar. I could draw a lot of parallels between both of our career paths and our journeys. I thought I was going to be an accountant. That's what I went to school for. Clearly, that couldn't be further from what I do today. And in fact, numbers terrify me now at this age. Whereas, like, I thought like I'd be an accountant. And I think, listen, when we're young, I think we especially generationally, you only saw certain careers, right? You saw these jobs that were very clearly defined. Like, everyone in school wanted to be like a fireman, a police officer, a doctor, like very specific professions that you could like see that we know and we were exposed to. But now, right, like you fast forward 20 plus years, and I won't give an exact number there because I don't want to age us, but we'll say like 20 plus years, right? And now the opportunities are endless. And like even my daughter who's going to school now, and we talk about like what she wants to do, my husband and I have to keep kind of like our lips sealed because I'm like, you know what? In 4 years, 5 years, who even knows what careers will be available for her that aren't today? And I think that's the interesting thing about where we grew up is this time of evolution and innovation that opened doors and new opportunities that never existed. And I think it's so cool that we got to take advantage of that.
I mean, people are literally writing their own job descriptions these days.
Right.
It's wild, right? So
Right.
I think that's a really great point. It's like we only thought about or aspire to be the things that were tangible or modeled in front of us, which were the accountant, the lawyer, the realtor, whatever,
Right.
right? So it was hard to think about outside the box when you hadn't seen it before.
Exactly. So I hope that the future generations, they are, and I believe that they are, because even just talking to my daughter, right? Like they are more open to possibilities and they know that they're exploring skills over trades, right? What are the things that
Yes.
I know that I'm good at and what are the things that I want to do that I like to do? And then hopefully we'll find a career path that will allow them to express those. So good for them. In the meantime, I was like failing out my accounting 101 class my freshman year of college. So
Well, not to get on a tangent, but like a lot of the education now is more skills-based learning, right? Where we were even
right.
taught a very different way of learning where they now tell
Yeah.
you don't teach your kid math because it's wrong. Like do not help them.
Listen, not that I can help my daughter because she's a mini genius and only taking like AP classes. So I can't even comprehend half the work that she's doing now. But even when she was earlier in school, yeah, she would come home and we would look at the same math problem and I couldn't help her because the minute I tried to do pen to paper, she's like, that's not how we're being taught it in class. And I'm like, oh, and I didn't want to derail the teaching because I knew that there is a reason why they're teaching them this way. And I'm like, I just don't know this way. But it's crazy because to your point, it is just so different.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Just totally different, like method, different opportunities for them. It's like really exciting.
Absolutely. Okay, so now I want to shift a little bit here because obviously you've painted your own path with your career, right? You've kind of taken it where you want to go and I'm sure you'll continue to do that. But when you think through your career journey, what were some of those big pivotal moments for you? Obviously the transition out of advertising is going to be one of them, but what were some of those decisions that you feel like really contributed to your success?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think the next pivotal moment for me was when so after advertising, I went in-house to a nonprofit, but they're like operate more like a business. Then I went to a public tech company and then I went into startup. And when I was leaving that startup, to a little bit of context, I had a relationship with my boss where we would come into companies, fix things like things would be broken. We came, we fixed, we scaled, we left, we did it again on repeat, right? Didn't matter, kind of like size, stage, industry. So I guess we were on company number 2 or 3 at the time. And the era, like the journey, that gig was up and it was time to kind of think about the next thing. And I remember thinking, like, what am I going to do next? And that person said, you can't come with me again. I'm like, well, what do you mean? This is kind of like what we do. And they're like, no, you are now ready to do my job somewhere else. And I'm like, I don't want to do that job. What do you mean? Like, it's so stressful. I don't want to be in the number one seat. Like, I'm all set. Thank you. And it was really, really scary because they were basically like, I can't take you with me. You're too close to my role. Like, there's no role for you where I'm going. And so I was at this crossroads of like, can I even get a job by myself? Like, I went through this crazy kind of headspace of, I've been on this quote unquote team where, like, sure, I interviewed at these companies, but, I had kind of a sponsor inside already who knew that what I was capable of. And even when I got there, it was kind of safe, right? Because I knew what they expected. They knew what I could do. And we kind of just like got the show on the road. And so everybody around me, friends, family, etc., were like, I'm not worried. You're fine. And I was like, literal hot mess. Like, I was just like, what am I going to do? I have to like stop spending all my money. I don't know when I'm going to get a job next. Like, I went to like catastrophic, like worst case scenario stuff,
Right.
like
As we do.
crazy thinking of just like, cut the cleaning lady. Like, we're like, literally, we have no money. Like, we have no money. And I had left that company, like, again, like left the company in maybe like August, September, like end of September. By the end of October, I had 3 job offers. But like, what I needed to go through was to prove to myself that I was capable on my own to stand on my own, and that I would be valued by people I'd never met before, and that they wanted me to work at their company. And so but that was really hard. Like, looking back, I'm like, well, of course that happened, but in the moment it felt really, really difficult. And it felt like, I think you grow a lot when you're really uncomfortable and when you have to kind of stretch outside your comfort zone. And the next role that I took, I was in that number one role. I was an executive at a startup where I was brought in to lead product and design, and then over time took on functions that I literally had never done in my life, like in the services space and hardware space and partnerships. And I grew so much, and I'm so grateful for that opportunity, because had I not gone through all of that, like, I would not have learned what kind of leader I was. Because at the end of the day, what I realized was I was always inheriting the leadership of that person. Even though I was in the number 2 spot, like, I was kind of following that lead. And I think being out on my own, I set the tone for like, what do I believe a great leader should be? How do I want to show up for my team? What do I want to do on a daily basis? Which was then an interesting insight for when I went back into a number 2 position. I had a really hard time.
Interesting. So now listen, I got to ask you, so coming off of a place where you had entered into companies where you did have pre-existing relationships with folks, and you knew who you were working with, to your point, like they knew what they were getting, you knew what you were getting. The first time that you did it where you didn't know anybody in there, what was that experience like for you?
I always, like, because I kind of moved around a lot, I always knew, I'm like, okay, even if I knew that one person, like, your first 6 months are still like earning trust, making sure you build relationships. And in my head, I'm like, okay, we're all going to be best friends. I know this, and we're going to be great collaborators. But I'm like, oh, I got to go do this again. And so I think for me, it was the same thing. But now what was the hardest, which I think, is like the most important person is your manager. And so it was the first time, like, I did not know who, like, my direct manager. And I think I took a different approach where, like, how could we cut to the chase? And I think this was maybe some early signs of maybe I did need to go into coaching, because, I kind of was like, okay, how can we get to know each other better around who we are, what we care about? Like, I wrote a manager's guide, right? That person, my boss at the time, the founder, like, had a, like, working with me kind of document of who I am and what I care about. It's like, how could we get to brass tacks and not dance around things for months and months and months? And of course that still happens because we're humans, right? And we don't know how things are going to turn out until we actually get into the work. And a lot of it is, in the details. But I think I did the same thing that I always did, which for me, relationships were everything. And I always focused on building human relationships and connections first, and really trying to understand, for my peers, it was a head of sales, a CMO, head of engineering is my CTO, that'd be my best friend, CFO, and really trying to deeply understand, like, what do you care about, and how could I be a partner to you? Like, to me, that was the most important thing. And I think that always works. Like, that my advice to people is, like, I think we've, like, moved so far away from humanity and connections over the past 5 years that it
Yeah.
has hurt business. And like, I'm not surprised that companies aren't doing well right now, right? And it's like, if there's anything you can double down on, it's human relationships, and like just understand people on a human level first. And I guarantee you the rest will follow. And so I realized I had always done that, like no matter what. And I just doubled down on it when I walked into somewhere new.
I love that. I think that makes a ton of sense. And I would actually agree. Sadly, I have to agree with you on the lack of relationships. And I see it all the time, right? Especially with these remote first work environments. It makes it that much more difficult to build relationships with folks when you're doing it once a week, twice a week via Slack, right? Like it is really hard when you're not in person, when you don't have the ability to connect, to have those sidebar conversations, to stop by someone's desk, to catch someone in the kitchen, right? Like all of those are moments to build relationships that we are lacking now for a lot of organizations. And, you know, it's interesting to see people just deprioritize that.
It's easy.
Yeah.
It's easy to deprioritize it. You have to face
yes.
it head on when you were in the elevator together, or where you're grabbing lunch, or you know what I mean? Like you're going to have those awkward interactions, so you can't hide behind, you know, Zoom or Slack. And there's something to that.
Let me ask you something. So like, I also feel like this is a big side effect of social media, right? Because I watch how people interact there. And I tell you, I've had some like really bizarre interactions as of late myself. And I've observed some things where it's just like people saying the most wild things on the internet, but you know that if you had this person in a room, they would never say those things. They would never behave that way. But something about the anonymity, something about the protection, about not being with somebody and just having this digital exchange allows people to treat others differently. Do you feel like growing up in this kind of world where that is how we're communicating, just digitally first, that is also impacting this entire experience negatively?
No, 1000%. I mean, like empathy is not there. Like empathy is the most important thing.
There's no respect
right?
either.
There's no empathy, there's no respect, and there's no accountability. So if there are no, like, if you don't deeply, like, you can't deeply relate to the other person, and if you have no empathy for where they're coming from, and then nobody's going to hold you accountable for your actions, then like, what do you expect?
Sadly, I expect a little bit more, but I definitely don't see it. And I don't know. I to your point, I think we all need to get better there. I don't know how we change that, but as organizations and especially as leaders, we need to be thinking about that more.
I mean, it was a topic even when I was in person, right? But I think it's been exacerbated, to your point, with remote work. And I see it like, not just forget social media for a second, like I saw it in the behavior of folks, even in large meetings, and the things that they would say, even in like a Zoom chat. And I would be shocked at the kind of like unprofessionalism. And I think, to your point, like, even if it's anonymous within an organization, it's just really interesting. And so I think empathy, like whether it's you're talking about it with your kids or like your friends, but even in the workplace, it's like people really need to deeply understand where the other person is coming from, right? So I'm thinking about it from the lens of product and engineering, and it's a different mindset, right? But when you think about it from the go-to-market side, like I was always thinking about how do we build empathy across the aisle? And like we all like, I was like, imagine that you literally get paid based on the business that you bring in. What a concept, right? I'm like, your paycheck comes every 2 weeks, no matter what, whether you ship the thing or you don't, right? And I think it's always about putting yourself in someone else's shoes. And if you're at a company, also, like, we have forgotten, we're all on the same team. Like, we work for the same organization.
Right.
And so there's always these like internal like fiefdoms and wars, which I never understood, because at the end of the day, we all want this thing to work and to win. And I don't get the infighting. I'm like, let's fight the external competitors. What are we doing?
Right. Do you know that if as much energy and focus was put on the external factors, and we just kind of all rallied around the one goal almost that every company has, whatever that looks like, but to ultimately be successful and whatever success looks like, if everyone just rallied around that, how that would change the outcomes. I feel like we exhaust so much time and energy on the wrong things.
We do, but unfortunately, if you want my opinion, ego gets in the way, right? Like,
yes.
People want the titles, they want the fiefdoms, they want land grabs, they want.
I was just going to say land grabs is the biggest thing, right? And all of a sudden a department is up for grabs and it's like, oh, well, they should report here, they should report there. I love it when people are always like, hey, where do you think X should sit? I'm like, I don't know. There's like 30,000 things I would consider before I can't answer that. I'm always like, it depends, because everything, it depends on something. I'm like, there's no right or wrong. There's no black or white. people for me are always like, hey, where do you think customer marketing sits? I'm like, I don't know. Like, let's talk about your company, your market, your product, like your teams. I mean, like, there's a billion things you would ask for, but like, it's crazy because most people, instead of asking those questions and being flexible, are right
They're
away.
like,
That's mine,
mine.
mine. I'm like, that's so
Right. And
crazy.
that's where ego gets in the way of like
Yeah.
actual success, because if we saw each other as a collective team and we actually operated that way and put our individual selves aside, like imagine what you could get done.
Oh, absolutely. Okay. So let's talk about something else for a second, because I want to talk about some of the challenges that we've had. Because I know, again, and if your career was anything like mine, there have been some obstacles that we've had to navigate along the way. So when you think about your career journey, what were some of those challenges or obstacles that you faced, and how did you overcome them?
Yeah. So I think there's kind of two different categories that I think about. So when I would say like senior IC to like mid-level manager, so up to, let's just say director, I think the challenge that I had was I had such strong conviction in, you know, what we needed to do or how we needed to go do it, especially coming from product. And you're probably like, yeah, oh God, you product people.
Oh, I
And
actually was thinking, wow, I'm the same way. I was really bad.
I was just like, this is how it needs to be done. And I think that I got things done. But could I have done it better? Like with buy-in and bringing people along for the ride? Probably, you know? And so I think at every chapter, so there was a certain, you know, role and company that I was at that I felt like was my boot camp in product management. And then my next role was really my boot camp in leadership and how do you build teams, turn over teams, get buy-in and work across the aisle. And then, you know, the next role was really about executive leadership, where you have to think from a company and a business perspective. And so I think the two kind of points were middle kind of career, realizing that there is a lot of value in seeking to understand and asking questions. And you may still be right. You may be right at the end of the day, right? But just getting people there to be with you at the same time. I always got feedback that you're already on step 12 and people are only on step 1.5, right? They cannot go that fast. And so you need to bring them along for the ride. So that was my first kind of inflection point of how do I do that? And this is where I always talk about, like when I was hiring a lot at like a growth stage startup and I was interviewing a million people. I didn't care if you're the smartest person on the planet, but if you could not communicate and align, I was like, communication and alignment were the most important things to me because that's what my superpowers were. And I don't care like what skills you bring to the table, how technical you are in product. If you can't do that, you're done. You're dead in the water. Right. But I think I learned that from like a lot of experiences along the way. And I think the second point was, you know, when you're a functional leader, and I think this topic came up a lot in the event we were at, it's no longer about your craft, right? And you have to start thinking about the business. And I had an experience where, you know, I made a mistake that I didn't understand the financials of the business. And I think that we invested incorrectly in the product and where we should have been spending time. And my lesson learned was really, you know, you really have to double down in understanding, you know, what are the financials, what matters most, and how can you tie the work of your team to those things. And I think that was kind of the inflection point of like, this is what it really means to be an executive. You need to really think from a business lens. It's no longer about your function or where you came from. It's about how you then lead teams to achieve those things for the business. But I don't think I would have learned that if not for some experiences and quote unquote learnings or failures along the way where, you know, you kind of feel like your pants are down and you're like, wait, what? Like that makes, you know, why are we doing that thing? And you start to question yourself.
I want to ask a question here. So, you know, I think a lot of folks who are in roles, they tend to almost have these realizations or these epiphanies along the way. And they're always like, yeah, in my next company, I'm going to do X differently, right? Or I'm going to do Y differently. But I feel like people are losing sight of the fact that like, you can make that change now. I feel like people feel like they've already they've made their bed and now they have to lie in it, whether they've burned bridges with relationships or they've, you know, created this persona for themselves in the organization. Like for me, probably early in my career, I was not very flexible, right? I was very like, nope, we're going to do it this way because my way works. I've proven it. I know this. Your way sucks. Like there was only one way to do things as far as I was concerned, and it was my way. And not that it was my way or the highway, but like yours, like my way, or like you're going to just ride on the shoulder for a little bit. So, so I definitely was not like, I wasn't great. I wasn't great. But what I could have done differently, and I always had this thing, like once I learned those lessons, I was like, I will take that lesson with me. And instead of saying like, how do I apply that lesson today? Because it's not too late. And I wonder how that mindset shift would have changed my career trajectory, because I could have been more successful longer in certain roles, in certain organizations, without feeling like I had to make a leap to go to something new to start fresh. What are your thoughts around that?
100% agree. But here's the thing: making a mindset shift on your own is really hard.
Oh
Okay.
God, I know.
And I don't think you actually internalize and process these things until way later. Like some of these realizations that I'm talking about now, like didn't happen for years. So I think if
Fair.
you don't have like a sounding board or either a manager or someone outside the company who can really help you process and think about things and say, okay, what are some small behavior shifts I can do right now? I think it's really difficult to kind of, because like you are sitting in it. It's like you have tunnel vision on, you're in that organization. And I think I was thinking about this the other day. At every company that I've been at, or like, when you're in an organization, you kind of start to absorb, right? Their ways of working, their ways of talking, like they have weird acronyms, but they also, you start to pick up on different, even, there's certain buzzwords that are used in some companies versus others. And so you get absorbed into this culture. And then it's really hard to sort of then take yourself out of it, right? Zoom out and say, okay, what do I want to do differently? So, unless you have like a really strong leader who's going to sit there and be like, all right, let's talk about this, or you have somebody on the outside who can pull you out of that culture for a
Mm-hmm.
minute and kind of observe yourself from a balcony view. I don't think that I would have been able to process that until like I couldn't process it until later, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. For me, like, okay, I'll give you a good example. So, like, some roles I've been in for several years. I think of my personal and professional growth in that one organization. I was 10 different people, right? Because you learn and you grow and you evolve. And so, what I want to tell myself is that, who I was 4 years ago is different than who I am now. You can
Yes.
make, like, I should be
That
evolving.
I
I
agree with.
should be
That I agree
changing,
with.
right? Like, you shouldn't be the same leader you are for an extended period of time. And I'm talking years, not months, right? But if you're at a company for years, you should be able to apply those growths and learnings so that
100%.
you can evolve and be a better leader. And I think without that, right, like this is where limitations in your career journey happen, right? You're going to hit a wall and you won't get those new opportunities. You won't be presented with promotions and growth because people don't see you as somebody who can evolve and grow.
Yeah. So I think that's different. So I'm thinking about like, what are these huge epiphanies that like I've processed from these like, journeys, and then what am I learning from them? What you're saying is like, you need to be able to scale yourself as you go. Right. And I think there
Mm-hmm.
are like these mini learnings along the way that I 100% agree with. And I think it comes with new scope, new opportunities, more accountability. Right. But also I think we can get again we get myopic within our own organizations. And I think I learned a lot from tapping into and building networks outside my organization, right? So
Yeah.
whether it's peer advisory groups, building my board of directors, just having folks on the outside where I can bounce ideas off of, that can also extricate you from your day to day and make you think about, okay, what's a different way I could approach this, or how should I be thinking about that? Which I didn't realize I was doing consciously, like throughout the years, but
Mm-hmm.
I was. And I just felt like it was always important to learn and grow from other people and see what are you doing over there that I may be able to learn from. Because once you get to a certain level, it's very lonely, right?
Oh gosh,
Who like
yes.
you look around and you're like, I don't have anyone to kind of ask, like, how have you done this before? And so
Right.
community is so important. And you have to start seeking that out. And what I would have told my younger self is like, you didn't realize it at the time, but you were building your network throughout your entire career.
Yep.
And if I was to tell people, like, I know people say like networking, and it seems like this like term that is just like kind of like
Yeah.
gross.
It sometimes feels icky to people.
It feels icky to people. And there's someone I know, her literal tagline is like taking the ick out of networking. But I would love to rebrand that word. And it goes back to building relationships. It's just like,
Yeah.
go build relationships with other human beings, because you don't know where your life is going to lead you or where your career will lead you. And you have to be able to just, that's what opens doors and opportunities or gives you ideas. I mean, going back to the conversation around like, what are even jobs that you could be doing? Like I still don't know what's possible. And I think just
Right.
continuing to talk to people, it's just like it opens up your mind and it gives you, it just creates more possibilities.
I love that. I do. And I like to believe that there are endless possibilities in front of all of us. The She's So Sweet podcast is brought to you by Client Success. Client Success is an all-in-one customer success platform to help post-sale implementation and success teams manage customers from new to renew. Through an industry-leading platform approach, Client Success gives businesses an in-depth view into customer health, product usage trends, along with churn and risk data so that your team can not only retain customers, but help them grow as well. Whether it's managing customer onboarding workflows in shared portals, building custom health scores, tracking sentiment with NPS surveys, or doing more with less through AI and automations, Client Success gives customer success professionals a true one-stop platform to manage all aspects of the customer journey. To learn more about the industry's fastest to implement customer success platform, visit www.clientsuccess.com. That's Client Success. Simple, powerful customer success. Okay, now listen, we've talked about challenges, we've talked about some of the obstacles we've had to navigate. I feel like as women, we do not celebrate our successes enough. And so I always like to spend time and say, like, when you look back at your career, what were your proudest moments? What were your biggest accomplishments? What are the things that you're like, yeah, I did that, and I'm like so proud? What are those things?
This might be like something that maybe other people wouldn't say, but I think some of my biggest moments were when I left an organization. I always felt super guilty, like leaving my team, right? Like I'd spent so much time building up a world-class team. I had connected with these folks. They became friends. And I was just always a bittersweet, right? Like I might've been ready to go on to my next thing, but I never wanted to leave the humans. And so the proudest moments that I had was seeing where they went afterwards, or, what they were able to do at that company once I was gone. And that made me like, that still fulfills me to this day. And just being able to see what people are capable of. Right. And I think a lot of times leaders kind of see their teams as, okay, like I need someone in this role to support me and that role and et cetera. But I love to see like them rise, and I'm like, go surpass me. Like maybe I'll work for you one day. Who knows?
Yep.
But for me,
I
my
always say
proudest
that.
moments are seeing where these people land because I knew what they were capable of and seeing them really demonstrate like their potential. That's like what I love. And I stay in touch with so many people, and I'm just like so proud of all of them. It's so fun to watch.
I know. I don't know about you, but I have this thing where it's like I look back and again, I sometimes forget how long I've been working, but I watch folks that, joined me very early in their professional journeys. And I'm like, now they're married and they have kids and they're vice presidents and they're doing, I'm like, where did that time go? But damn, like it's not even just their professional growth. I also, to your point, these are friends. There are real deep rooted relationships in these folks. And so being able to see their personal and professional journeys kind of grow and like watch them evolve as humans and like what they're contributing to the world, to their families, to their communities. And I'm like always so inspired by watching them. And I always think like, wow, okay, even if I played the smallest little part in their story, like that, it's heartwarming. It's motivating. It keeps me going. And so I always hope that anybody I've had an opportunity to work with, maybe they don't have maybe their story about me isn't 100% positive, but even if they can find like a couple of things where they are inspired, they were motivated, they were driven, or they learned something from me, I always feel like that's a really great takeaway as any leader should have that.
100%. And like some of them I'm still in touch with to this day. I'm like, it's a tough market, right? Like I'm helping folks wherever I can.
Yep.
And I just think like, again, it goes back to relationships and, how much I care a lot about people. And I believe that if you kind of help in any way, shape or form, whether it's even just time, like being an ear, whatever, like all of that just puts good energy back into the world. And I think it comes back around. So, just like tenets of like being kind and helpful. Like, I just think that goes such a long way.
Absolutely. Okay. So in the spirit of being kind and helpful, you and I reconnected here at a women's event. And so I always say like my favorite thing to talk about is like empowered women empower women. And I think we've already talked about this a little bit. You've kind of woven this through your story here, but what would you say that you're doing now to empower other women as they're thinking about their professional journeys or they're taking on leadership outside of the formal engagements that you do as an executive coach? But are there other things that you're doing to really continue to up-level other women?
Yeah. I'm constantly meeting new people and I'm always happy to chat with folks. So it's like, it doesn't need to be like a paid coaching engagement, but
Yeah.
I really love just being able to help people. And it's like along the coaching lines, just realize what they're capable of. And I'm so glad we didn't use like the term in this entire podcast so far, so I'm going to kind of say it, even though it's taboo. Like, I hate the term imposter syndrome because it like automatically like basically insinuates that it exists in everybody, but women definitely still have a hard time with, I'll just say, confidence. But the
Yes.
reality is what I love to do is really help those folks realize that they actually are incredible at what they do. And so I'd love to empower them by reminding them of those things, because it has been a tough market. There have been a lot of terrible experiences with toxic managers. There have been just like really traumatic things that have happened in the workplace. And so if there's any way that I can just be a just little force of bringing to light the positive things that you are capable of to push you forward, like I'm always happy to do that. And I remember, I was catching up with an old colleague over the summer, somebody I worked with maybe 10 years ago, and we were just reconnecting and literally just like catching up. And I had no idea, but then months later, I kind of just checked in with her, and she was like, I have to tell you, that conversation like changed everything for me, because she was thinking about leaving a very toxic experience. She was more than capable, had carried the load of this firm on her back, and decided to go out her own. And she has never been happier. She's super successful. And I had no idea that our just like one catch up or little conversation just pushed her forward. And to me, that's like, that I love that. I think that's empowering women to do what they know they're capable of, but they're maybe too afraid to say out loud or to actually go do. And so I love being there to make them say it out loud and, remind them that they're totally capable of doing it.
I love that so much. It's always interesting to me. I don't know if you've had similar experiences or have heard things from folks, but there's this idea that like confidence can't be learned, right? Like you're either confident or you're not confident. And I gotta tell you, like, I don't know what you were like when you were younger. I was not confident. Like I was timid and shy and like uncertain and awkward. And I mean, I can't even tell you like how many things I said no to out of just fear. Like fear, opportunities that could have probably catapulted my career, my brand, whatever, at different stages of my journey. But I just said no because I lacked that confidence. And it took me time to realize like, you're not either confident or not confident. You can build into this. And like, I learned how to be confident when I found my voice and I leaned into my authenticity and I just felt more comfortable in who I was. And I wasn't scared about what I said or how I said it. And, kind of just released myself of others' opinions and kind of like allowed myself to be and exist. But I don't know. Do you hear similar things from folks who just feel like there's this idea that they can't be confident and they can't break out of where they are today?
Yes. And I think it's also this, and I have this problem, it's our relationship with the word failure. Because I think that we put so much pressure on ourselves that it's like everything seems so high stakes and so heavy, this huge weight that we hold. And I had this problem of like, I will not fail. Right. But if you redefine what that really means is like, isn't that just a learning? Right. And so if you can reframe things as, okay, well, what did I learn from this? Instead of like, oh, I failed, I suck, right? Beat the crap out of yourself, which I always did. I literally always did. Like I was the meanest person to myself out of everybody. And
we would never say the things that we say to ourselves to anybody else, like to anybody else.
Nope.
Isn't it crazy?
I literally just talked about that with my son because I see him doing the things that I've done my whole life. I'm like, oh God, he's saying, like, oh God, he's beating the crap out of himself. And I'm just like, this is such silly stuff. And I'm like, hey, would you say this to your friend? And he's like, no. I'm like, okay, then why do you say it to yourself? I'm like, God, I should say that. Let's take my own advice. But I think that there's something there because I think if we think about things differently, it becomes a totally different conversation, right? And the confidence becomes more of like, well, I'm capable of figuring this out, right? Or let me go, what's the first step that I can take versus this binary, like I'm good, I'm bad. And so I think it's all really tied together around how can we be more confident in our capabilities and being able to be resourceful, problem solve, whatever it is, because guess what? Our jobs are literally to solve problems, like as leaders, like, and there's no shortage of problems every day, all day.
Oh,
so like, that's why we were hired. And even in any role, I would say like your job is to solve problems for the company. Like your problem may look different if you're in a different function or a different role. But literally like you should expect those things to come up. So instead of it being, I can do this, I can't do this, it should be more about, what skills do I have and how can I use those? What's the first step that I can take? And I think it's just always about reframing. And I wish somebody told me that 10 years ago.
I love that. I love that idea. And I think, listen, I think anyone who's listening to this probably needs that reminder. So either they needed to hear that for the first time, or they needed a reminder that that is the case, because to your point, it is about the reframing of that. Okay, so let's talk about something else for a second. And I'm watching how much time we've got left, but I do want to talk about this because I think that this comes up often, but there's this idea that we can have it all. And by we, anybody, I'm not going to say women, but we can have it all, but we can't all have it all at the same time. And I think this comes into this idea of balance and finding the ability to prioritize things that are important in your life. So when you think about your life as a whole, personal, professional, all of the elements that make you, how do you find balance in your day-to-day? Or what are the things that you have put in place, strategies or habits that you've found effective in trying to find your own balance, whatever that looks like?
Yeah, let me preface this by saying I remember my CMO when I started at that startup was like, we all got to we have to write thought leadership articles on LinkedIn. And so I wrote about this topic, right? I'm like, literally anything? She's like, yeah, anything. I'm like, what a crock that I wrote, about like how I had balance and how I thought about it from this like product lens. And I'm like, that was literally not true. And I was like, that doesn't exist. Actually, it just doesn't exist. It's a fallacy. Right. So I think it's more about what are you optimizing for? Like what's important to you. Right. And it can change over the period of your life. So like, I
Yeah.
would say, when my kids were younger, I optimized more for my career because they were in daycare and they need a lot from you physically, but mentally and emotionally, not so much. Now that my kids are older, I'm optimizing for more time with them because I think that they need more mental and emotional support. And so I think that, you have to define what balance looks like for you and what's important to you. And every day is not going to look the same. There are days
Yep.
where I don't see, I'm like, sorry, I'm not going to see you. I'm working and then I'm going to some event. And by the time I get home, you're going to be asleep. And so I think, and then there may be a day where I can pick them up at 4 and I spend more time with them. And so I think it comes down to really tuning out the noise outside, because this is another thing of not just balance, but what is success in our society, and
Right.
tuning out what other people say it should look like. I remember somebody telling me, oh, you don't eat dinner as a family every night? That's really sad. Like there's so much judgment out there around what we do and don't do and all the things we're supposed to do to be healthy or great moms or great like friends
Right.
and wives and whatever. And so again, it comes down to like what's important to me, what's important to my family, what's important to my career, and what do I want that to look like? It doesn't look the same every day. I lean on a network of people. I have, you have to build your little community. I rely on them for the carpools, the help. Sometimes I have to say no to things, right? Sometimes it won't work
Right.
out for work and I have to set those boundaries. But I think that it's been an evolution. Like I was someone who powered through, like literally powered through the hardest things when I was, earlier in my career and when I had really young kids. And it took a toll on me. I said
Yeah.
yes to everything. And I was like running myself ragged, from all aspects of life. And it just doesn't work. So I think, everybody's different. And like some of us are more extroverted, some of us need more kind of time to ourselves. And I'm not going to tell people how to live their lives. I think you just need to get really
Right.
clear on what works for you.
I love that. I think it's important for everyone to figure out their thing. And I think it's so easy for us to want to look to somebody and just emulate what worked for them. And I say this, whether it's a playbook of success, right? Like you always have these folks, and I'll use LinkedIn as an example, who is like a successful entrepreneur. And they're like, here's the 5 things that you need to go do right now to go make $1 billion tomorrow. And I'm always like, please stop. I'm like, everything about their situation was unique to them. The fact that they started their company, I don't know, 20 years ago, the market, the economy was different. The world was different. Everything was different. You cannot compare. And so I love just your emphasis on the uniqueness of your balance, your life, your time, your priorities. And so lean into that and figure out what works for you in that moment, and also recognize it's going to evolve.
Oh, everything changes. Like if there's anything that I can say, it's like things will constantly change. So don't get attached to anything.
Yes, I love that. Okay, well, listen, as we wrap up our conversation today, and I like, honestly, as we're talking here, I'm like, damn, we could actually go for like a 3-hour episode, and that would be super easy for me to talk to you about. But before we wrap up, what's the one thing you'd want our listeners to take away with them?
I think it would be that be intentional and be thoughtful about what fulfills you and what you like to do, right? I think a lot of people listen to outside voices. It's been a theme, right? The external feedback, noise, etc., around what you should be doing, what you're good at, what you should keep doing. And so I don't think we spend enough time, and I didn't early enough. I don't think we spend enough time really thinking deeply about what am I attracted to, what fulfills me, what lights me up, and where do I want to be really spending more time. And so I think it's just really important to get clear on that, or to continue to have that conversation with yourself, which is also tied to defining what success looks like for you. I think in our society, success equates to, in general, money and title, which I don't think is the end all be all, right? And so success may look differently. It may be, I want to have a creative career where I can be present for my family, whatever it is. Like, I think it's all about asking yourself those questions, and the answers will change, and that's okay. But being intentional about asking yourself those questions. I did not do that enough until later. And I wish that I had spent time really thinking more deeply about that.
I love that. I think it's a great way to wrap up our episode today. And so, Tara, I just want to thank you so much for sharing so much of your story with us. Really, truly inspiring, super motivating. I think I always walk away from these episodes taking a ton of my own personal mental notes. And I'm like, okay, these are the things I need to go work on. And I've got plenty of those coming out of our conversation today. So I just want to thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And I love what you're doing. Keep doing it.
Oh, thank you so much. And for our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, please rate and follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, subscribe on YouTube, connect with me on LinkedIn. And until next time, we'll see you soon. Hi, guys. I want to share a bit about an organization that I support called Wednesday Women. They're on a mission to increase the visibility of executive women leaders that you should know, learn from, and be inspired by. On LinkedIn, they share the profile of 2 amazing women each week, on Wednesdays, of course. And now just imagine if we all followed, amplified, and nominated the women that we want to see more of. Their initiative provides examples of women CEOs, founders, sales executives, technical leaders, and so many more. By supporting Wednesday Women, you'll see more of these professionals in your social feeds, of course, but also on stages, podcasts, and panels. If you're interested in learning more and supporting their initiative, head over to www.wednesdaywomen.org or follow them on LinkedIn.